Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan. I've been practicing law for 25 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often heard about this stuff from places like roadandtrack.com, and I've written a few books. Today we're going to talk about the Ford Powershift class action settlement. We're going to explain the Ford Powershift class action settlement. I've gotten a lot of questions about this, emails and phone calls, because some notices were sent out recently. So if you've got one of these vehicles, you may have heard about this already. We're talking about the dual clutch automatic transmission that is in some Ford products in the last few years, and I've talked about them before because there's a widespread problem in that I would argue every single one of these cars in a road with one of these transmissions has got problems and is defective. And I've had people say, no, Steve, that's just how they're supposed to be. Well, the way this class action has been settled, it is very, very apparent that no, these vehicles are all defective. So here's how the class action works. And by the way, if you are affected by the class action, you will be notified. So the number one thing I can tell you as an attorney, my advice to you, whether you're in Michigan or not, watch your mailbox. You're going to get postcards and other correspondence that often looks like junk mail. But it's not quite as bad as the junk mail you get otherwise, because sometimes this stuff will catch your attention. But you're going to get notices. And if you don't get notices or you're curious, you can look this stuff up on the internet. I'll give you the information several times throughout today's podcast. But you can go to FordTransmissionSettlement.com. I wish I'd thought to buy that URL a few years ago. Well, FordTransmissionSettlement.com. There's also a phone number you can call. It's a toll-free number. But basically, we're talking about the Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission that was in the Ford Focus from 2012 to 2016 and the Ford Fiesta from 2011 to 2016. So this class action was filed in California, but it was filed in federal court, and it covers the entire country. So if you are in the United States of America and any one of the 50 states, plus I presume Guam or Puerto Rico, and you've got one of these vehicles, this will affect you in one way or another. So you have to really stop and think about this. Now, I've talked about class actions before. I've filed class actions, and I've also been a member of a class, and I've also just studied class actions, both in law school and in my practice. And I can tell you that many class actions have what we'd call illusory settlements. That is, a settlement that doesn't look like it actually provides anything to the class members once you take a close look at it. It looks to me like this Ford Powershift class action does a good job of taking care of the people in the class and actually will offer you full relief, which you never see this in class actions. You often see a class action where it'll say, if you had a checking account with this bank during this time period, you might be a member. If you bought this particular product, within the last 10 years, and then you go and read what you get, and you get almost nothing. A lot of times it's like you get a coupon good for a discount if you buy another product from the people who ripped you off last time. And I've seen it before where you're literally looking at it going, this does not do me any good. This is worthless. And then, of course, you read through the entire settlement, and you discover that the attorneys who settled this case got millions of dollars in fees, and then you go, oh, I understand what's going on here. But the Ford Powershift class action actually provides substantive relief. Substantive. I said that on purpose. It actually has substance to it, and it's actually a good thing. So let me explain to you some of the things that you will get potentially if you're in this class. It depends on what happened to you, by the way. So one of the most common complaints I heard from people who had or have Ford Powershift dual clutch transmissions is they'll say, well, every time I complain about it, the dealership reflashes the transmission and they say, it's fixed now, go. The consumer then goes out and they drive around in their transmission in their vehicle for a little while, and the transmission starts acting funny again. And by the way, if you don't know, and if you own one of these vehicles, you do, but if you don't know what we're talking about, the Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission has a problem where if it's in a laboratory setting and it's working perfectly, it's a great vehicle transmission, but it often shifts harshly, slams into gear, or it seems like it's slipping and then it catches and it slams into gear. And it does a bunch of things that you wouldn't expect an automatic transmission to do. And I've heard people try to explain it and say, well, this vehicle transmission, it's kind of like a hybrid in that it's an automatic transmission that's shifting like a clutch transmission, like a manual transmission or standard shift. But it's kind of like the best of both worlds, when in reality it's the worst of both worlds. So if you've got one of these vehicles and the transmission's been subjected to a bunch of reflashes, you can actually get paid for any reflash past number 2. So basically what they've agreed to do is say, look, 2 reflashes of your transmissions is reasonable, okay? First time reflash, second time reflash. Third time, yeah, something, that was too much. So you can get a couple $100 for the third reflash of your transmission, and it actually goes up each time. So if you actually brought your vehicle in and they reflashed the transmission 8 times, some people have gone through this, they'll pay you $575 cash for that. Just here's some cash for your troubles. And then if you don't want cash, let's suppose you actually aren't so bothered by this that you're willing to take another Ford product somewhere down the road, they'll give you a discount certificate that's roughly double the value of the cash payment. In fact, it's exactly double. So on the third reflash, they'll pay you $200 cash or a $400 discount certificate. And then, of course, the eighth, $575 or $1,150 on the discount certificate. And then there's a bunch of other things that they will do for you. They do point out that the cash payment does have a cap. And so your cumulative payments under Section 2C1 are capped at a cumulative total of $2,325, and so on and so forth. And I can't get into every detail of the settlement. I got it this morning and started printing up the 150 some odd pages of it, and I realized, why should I destroy a whole tree just to read this settlement? So I read it on my screen, printed out the important stuff, and I'm just going to talk about the highlights here today, okay? But I thought it was pretty cool that they're going to basically say, look, we inconvenienced you all these times reflashing your transmission, and we admit it did virtually nothing, so we'll pay you for that. And that's not a bad deal. I think it's a great deal, actually. Now, if you bought a vehicle that was manufactured after June 5th, 2013, and I don't know why they chose that date. I'm sure someone will tell me eventually in the comments. But if your vehicle was manufactured after June 5, 2013, there's a few things that will go on here, but they will actually extend the warranty on your vehicle and do some other things. So pay very close attention to that with respect to the build date on your vehicle. June 5, 2013 is the magic number. But here is actually the thing that I think is the neatest aspect of this settlement. And we're talking about, of course, the Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission class action settlement. And they have said, let's create an arbitration program. Okay? Arbitration program. Now, I often complain about arbitration when it's binding and you're forced into it and you've got no choice, okay? You wake up one morning, you realize you've been ripped off, and then you look at a document you signed where you agreed to binding arbitration. What this class action settlement is going to do is it's going to create an arbitration program where they're actually going to let you arbitrate several different kinds of claims. And now you might say, Steve, why would I want to do that? Well, the whole point behind arbitration, if it's done right, is it can get you a faster result. And I've got no problem with arbitrations if they're conducted fairly, okay? It's when they invent weird rules and slant it against the consumer. And it appears that they've set up a good arbitration program here. And they're going to allow 2 different kinds of claims to go through this arbitration process. And I think they've actually gone further than they needed to. So I have to applaud the plaintiff's counsel who put together this settlement agreement and got Ford to agree to it. Because number one, if your vehicle qualifies under the Lemon Law, obviously you can simply file a claim with an attorney like me and pursue a litigation under the Lemon Law. And I've got cases like that right now in my office. I'm representing people who bought defective cars. It's got a Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission. And it qualifies under Michigan's lemon law, and we're going to pursue it, and we're going to get our remedies in the Michigan state courts. But there's an arbitration provision in this agreement, the settlement agreement here, the class action, that says if you've got a lemon law claim in your state and you simply want to just get it over with faster, you can file a claim with the arbitration process that's created by this settlement and go through that process and see what happens. But the other interesting thing is, and this is cool, they say that the arbitrators are going to be required to follow the state law of the state where the claimant comes from. So a person from Michigan who files a claim with this class action arbitration provision will then have an arbitrator who's going to apply Michigan law to their claim. And if it happens in Florida, Florida law, and so on and so forth. But there are a lot of people out there, and I've spoken to many of them. That's why I know there's a lot of people out there who are in this boat, who have vehicles with the Ford Powershift dual clutch transmission that are clearly defective, but they don't qualify under the state lemon law. And the main reason usually is that the timing didn't work out. In other words, they got the vehicle, they drove it for a year and a half, and then the transmission went completely and started acting up. Okay? So the problem didn't occur within the first year of ownership. So under Michigan lemon law, there's no lemon law claim there. It's also possible, because you need to have a certain number of repair attempts within the first 2 years, that if you only brought it in 3 times in the first 2 years, and now it's 2.5 years later, and now the transmission goes kaplooey, which is a technical term, you don't have a claim under the lemon law there either. Now, I often tell my clients, I say, well, there's a law called the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act that doesn't have the same strict guidelines as the lemon law, and if a vehicle's got a defect and it's covered by warranty and so on and so forth, Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act might cover it. Well, the cool thing is that this class action settlement agreement has the arbitration provision in it that specifically says that if a vehicle has a defective transmission and it has not been repaired under warranty, in other words, the problem still exists right now, and the vehicle doesn't qualify under the state lemon law of whatever state that claimant is in, the claimant can still file a claim with the arbitration procedure in this settlement, and the arbitrators are empowered to award buybacks. So a vehicle that doesn't qualify under your state's lemon law. Now, you did have a Magnuson-Moss claim you could make, but they're much harder to make because you've got to argue what's reasonable and so on and so forth. And so the fact that they actually said the arbitrators can decide 2 different kinds of claims, the lemon law claims under state law, and then the non-lemon law claims. I mean, I'm impressed. That's neat. And I will tell you that along with those 2 concepts, the simple idea that you can submit these claims to arbitration, there's a couple extra things that I was really impressed by, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they got this in here. But number one, the arbitrators in both those settings are allowed to award attorney fees. So that means that if you've got one of these cases, one of these vehicles, and you're not sure what you're going to do, you can contact an attorney and say, hey, I want to hire you, but I want to hire you to pursue a claim through the Ford Powershift class action settlement. And I want to go through the arbitration process because the arbitrator can award attorney fees. And I think they put the cap at $6,000. So an attorney can earn $6,000 if your claim is granted and the arbitrator awards the fees. And that is both in a lemon law setting and a non-lemon law setting. So that's actually pretty cool. They wrote that in there. I'm impressed. And then the other thing I can tell you that I was, again, impressed by is that in the arbitration process, as outlined in the class action settlement, if you lose your arbitration, there's actually a process whereby you can file an appeal, which binding arbitration generally is not appealable. That's what makes it binding. And so they actually, I guess, in recognition of the fact that there's going to be thousands of claims potentially filed, that some mistakes might get made, and they actually said if the consumer doesn't like the outcome of the arbitration, there's going to be an appeal process whereby they can appeal the finding. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, the same organization that put together the appellate process, the arbitration process, also put together the appellate process. Your odds of winning an appeal are probably not that good, but the fact that they simply have the provision for that is impressive in and of itself, and I thought that was pretty cool. And so the reasonable attorney fees are recoverable. And then one other thing that, I'm surprised, but again, the plaintiff's attorneys, and by the way, I'm not related in any way, shape, or form. I don't even know who these attorneys are. I saw their names, didn't recognize any of them. But the plaintiff's counsel who put together the settlement agreement, I'm extremely impressed by, because they point out that Ford Motor Company in many states uses the Better Business Bureau auto line provisions, so that if you want to arbitrate a claim against Ford Motor Company in most states, they'll send you the BBB, and the BBB then will administer a claim. If you went through the BBB on a Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission claim and you were denied, you can actually resubmit your denied claim through the arbitration process of this class action. Again, something they didn't have to do. And they could very easily have said, those people already tried. They've already lost. They should just go home. But that's not the case. So I am impressed with the Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission class action settlement as it has been proposed. And it has not been finalized yet. You have to understand the whole process that goes on. The lawsuit gets filed, it gets certified as a class. They've got a hearing to determine if the class is appropriate. Then they have settlement negotiations. Then they have a period of time where they look at this stuff. And then there's a date at which the settlement gets approved and finalized by the court. And as of right now, that date is October 2nd of 2017. So it's a couple months down the road that they're proposing the settlement will become final. But some preliminary notices have been sent out to people who've got these vehicles. And by the way, the settlement will also apply to people who owned the vehicles in the past who don't have them anymore. Because if you owned the vehicle in the past, for instance, and paid to have repairs done on it, you might be able to get that money back. And likewise, if you went in and had your transmission reflashed 8 times or 7 times or 6 times or any more than 2, you can also get financial compensation even though you don't own the car anymore. So there's going to be a lot of information floating around out there and a lot of stuff you need to digest. But if you owned one of these cars or you currently own one of these cars, watch for the notices in the mail. It's going to look a lot like this on the video I can show you. On the audio, you'll have to trust me that it's a piece of paper with a lot of words on it. But this is simply one of the many notices. But the settlement agreement itself is something like 150 pages thick, and I mean thick. So again, go to FordTransmissionSettlement.com or call the toll-free number, which is 844-540-6011. And as they say in all the notices, please do not call the courts. Don't call the courts. The courts don't have answers for you. They don't have time for this. So call the people who've set up the process to help you at FordTransmissionSettlement.com or call 844-540-6011. Like I said, I've got nothing to do with this particular lawsuit. I am simply reviewing it, and in my opinion, it's an impressive piece of work. Again, you can always call your own attorney. You can call me. You can call any attorney you want to get advice about this, but you're going to, somewhere down the road, have to make a decision. Do I want to be in this or do I want to be out of this? Because if you simply don't respond to the notices, you might be in it because this is one of those things you have to opt to get out of. So that's the Ford Powershift dual clutch automatic transmission class action settlement explained as best I can in the short time period we have for Lehto's Law. Questions or comments, as always, shoot them my way. Lehto'sLaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO, and this show is on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks for watching and listening.